When you walk under this lift bridge, you enter the magical world of the Misty Mountain Railroad. The Misty Mountain is one of the most unique O-gauge model railroads in the world. It's the work of these three men, Charles Griffin, his son Ken Cluth, and their good friend Don Morris. While the idea to build the Misty Mountain Railroad began in the mid-90s, the seeds for the building of this railroad were planted way back in 1938. It was Uncle Fred who got everything started.
And he gave me my first train down American Flyer, Hiawatha, from 1938. And that started everything with it all. Ken made a station, the Milwaukee train station, as a tribute to Uncle Fred for me.
And that station, like most of Ken's scratch-built structures, looked very much like the real thing. Charles' visits by rail to see Uncle Fred built lasting childhood memories. Those trips were made during the golden age of passenger trains, when long-distance travel meant going by train. Charles remembers how he would spend hours with his face pressed against the coach window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the engine when the train rounded a curve. In order to build a model railroad of this size, a good plan was needed. Charles, Ken, and Don spent 2 full years designing and planning this railroad. Charles' hometown of Blairsville is nestled in the mountains of North Georgia.
We wanted to represent North Georgia in a fantasy, like in the different towns and areas. So we needed a lot of room, and it pretty well followed the plan.
The plan was a good one, and the Misty Mountain Railroad looks very much like northern Georgia. Rugged mountains, deep valleys, high bridges, tunnels, rivers, and streams are all found in this part of Georgia, and you'll find them here on the Misty Mountain Railroad too. Building this railroad was a monumental task. Why did they do it?
We built it for my grandsons mainly, and it got very popular after that, with really thousands of people coming. So it's not made for a public layout. Aisles are very narrow, and we have some bridges you have to duck under, but that seems to add to the enjoyment of going through it. We've been working on it 16 years. First we spent 2 years designing it, which is unusual, but there is so much in it, and we wanted it to represent North Georgia and some of the different locations and the different areas, the mountains and the valleys. We wanted it to have a lot of depth to it, like you're looking down into the valleys and up into the mountains. So it did. It took a good 2 years to design it and make the building for it. It is one of the largest home layouts in the country, they tell us. And but better than that, we like it to be one of the most interesting layouts that people come to see. That's what they tell us. It's one of the most interesting layouts they have ever seen.
Interesting is putting it mildly. The train room is 55 feet by 72 feet, and the railroad takes up the entire room. The Misty Mountain is both a walk-around and an around-the-room layout, and it has the most unique scenery we've ever seen. When visitors come to see this railroad, they might feel like they'll get their feet wet because they actually walk in the river. Charles and the team wanted to provide the experience of being in the mountains, and the layout literally engulfs you as you walk through it. The railroad has 12 bridges, 4 trestles, and 15 tunnels. It occupies 3,300 square feet in a room above Charles' garage and has over a mile of track in that space. The real Blairsville has no railroads because it's too high up in the mountains at 2,500 feet above sea level. But if there had been railroads in Blairsville, well, they probably would have looked like this. The bill of materials required to build this railroad is staggering. There are 7 tons of lumber in the benchwork. All this gorgeous scenery is made with hydrocal, more than 6,000 pounds of it. Don Morris worked on the benchwork, did all the wiring, and built the custom bridges. Ken Kluth built the mountains and many of the scratch-built buildings. Charles' role on the team was to lay and ballast the track and tend to the thousands of little details seen on this railroad. This team of 3 men worked 40-plus hours a week for 7 years to build this masterpiece, often working into the late evening hours. The track is all guardrails, and the switches are all made by Curtis. All the switches are powered and can be operated from the main control panel. The panel itself is off to the side and across the valley from the layout. They planned it this way so the panel would not intrude on the enjoyment of the layout. At the panel are 6 big right-of-way transformers, 2 Z4000s, and 2 old Lionel ZWs. They can run up to 14 trains at once, but they don't often run that many because the railroad just doesn't look real with that many trains running at one time. Another impressive detail on the Misty Mountain Railroad is the backdrop mural. Jim Fleming, whose trade is actually house painting, created this wonderful mural that graces the walls of the layout. Jim's artwork ties the whole railroad together, which helps create the illusion of reality. One of the highlights of Jim's mural is this rendition of Charles Griffin's home. Gorgeous rays of sunlight shine through the clouds onto the house. And check out that road. You can't tell where the road ends and the backdrop painting starts. What is truly amazing is that the view of the road going off into the distance is perfect from every angle. The custom-built bridges on this railroad are a sight to behold. This is the Misty Mountains model of the Tallulah Gorge, the deepest gorge east of the Mississippi River. There are 4 bridges which span the gorge. The lowest bridge is only about 6 inches off the floor, while the high bridge across the gorge is 5 feet above the floor. And speaking of the floor, the river at the bottom of this scene is actually the floor of the room. Except for the Lionel Basque bridges on the river line, Don Morris built all these bridges from scratch. The high red bridge is 3 feet long, while the girder bridge in the foreground is modeled after the CSX bridge, which crosses Interstate 24 west of Chattanooga. That bridge is 4.5 feet long. This deep gorge cuts right through one corner of the layout. It's a favorite spot for visitors to enjoy the impressive view of trains passing over these high bridges. This scene works because the high, steep walls of the gorge create the illusion of actually being in the gorge. There's another impressive bridge on this railroad, and it's right at the entrance. This lift bridge is another of Don Morris' creations.
Chuck said, I want to put a train on the line, and he went like this with his hands, and the bridge has got to get out of the way, and the train's got to go through, and just make it happen. It's kind of a modified elevator system. It's built like an elevator. It's got tracks made out of drawer guides, and it runs with bicycle chains and sprockets and drill motors, and it just runs up and down. It's got limit switches, just like a real elevator. And if the track isn't perfectly seated, the train will stop. I use 2 Makita drill motors.
The Chattahoochee River runs almost all the way around the layout, and there are 7 more railroad bridges which cross the river. The most impressive of those bridges is this one, the O.B. Stewart Memorial Bridge. This huge stone arch bridge is named after the late O.B. Stewart, a good friend of Charles who passed away a few years ago. No model railroad depicting the Old South would be complete without a model of Tara, the famous mansion from the movie Gone with the Wind. Frank Lowry built this model, and it's one of 3 buildings on the railroad that he created. Frank is a master craftsman when it comes to making accurate and realistic models like this. Tara is made from cardstock covered with a thin layer of plaster. Frank then carved the details into the plaster to achieve this marvelous result. Frank also built this building, the Terminal Station in downtown Atlanta. This massive structure is a very accurate representation of the real Terminal Station in Atlanta. Once again, attention to detail makes this building appear almost real. Atlanta Terminal Station was raised in 1972, but it still lives on at the Misty Mountain. Atlanta had another train station about 4 blocks away from the Terminal Station. Ken Cluth built this beautiful model of Atlanta Union Station. The real station was originally built in 1930 and was demolished in 1971. These two stations set the scene for downtown Atlanta on the Misty Mountain Railroad. However, the centerpiece of this city scene is the Georgia Capitol Building. Frank Lowry built the dome, while Ken built the building itself. Here again, the attention to detail and accuracy is astounding. The dome itself is built to scale, while the building is proportionately scaled down to fit the space they had available. The Misty Mountain Railroad has also recreated some of the more significant events in the history of the South. One of the greatest stories to come out of the Civil War was the Great Locomotive Chase. The Misty Mountain Railroad has a very effective representation of that epic chase. The Union soldiers are trying to make their escape over the railroad in the General, while the rebels are giving chase in the Texas locomotive. The real General locomotive is now housed at the Southern Museum of Civil War and Locomotive History in Kennesaw, Georgia, while the Texas is on display in the Cyclorama building at the Atlanta Zoo. Just across the valley from the locomotive chase is the little town of Cornelia. One of Cornelia's claims to fame is a very unique story. They were hosting an Atlanta Crackers baseball game when the longest home run in history was hit. The ball went over the fence and landed in a coal hopper on a passing train. The ball went all the way to Chattanooga. This little animated park in Cornelia was built by Ed Jones. Dahlonega is another little town on the Misty Mountain Railroad with a significant place in Georgia history. It was the location of the first major United States gold rush. In 1828, a belt of gold was discovered in the area, and that led to a large influx of miners. Dahlonega, which is Cherokee language meaning yellow money, became the Lumpkin County seat. That led to the establishment of United States branch mints at Dahlonega and in Charlotte, North Carolina. These two branch mints produced their first gold coinage in 1838. This is the Georgia Mountain Fair, an event held every summer in Hiawassee, Georgia. The fair scene was built by Ed Jones from Pittsburgh. Close by the Georgia Mountain Fair is the circus, always a fascinating attraction on a model railroad. This circus scene was built by Marlon Weaver. Deeper in the mountains, the railroad crosses this huge wooden trestle. This is the Misty Mountains recreation of the old Tallulah Gorge trestle. Don built this trestle from sticks cut from 2x4s. This fabulous trestle is just over 17 feet long. Over on the other side of Brasstown Bald, there's a high suspension bridge heading into Blairsville. This beautiful bridge is another of Don Moore's creations. He had a very unique approach to the design of this bridge.
That bridge was designed so we could stand there and you could see through it. It was designed more for the view than for the shape of the bridge. It doesn't obstruct the view of the valley, but it's massive enough to travel that distance of span.
While Don Morris bridges certainly get a lot of attention, there's another craftsman whose handiwork appears all over this railroad. Charles' son Ken built many of the scratch-built buildings on this layout, and his work is amazing. For example, over in Gainesville, Georgia, Ken built this model of the old Piedmont Hotel. Owned by Confederate General James Longstreet, who ran it after the Civil War, most of this hotel was destroyed in a tornado in 1936. But this grand old hotel was a Georgia landmark, so it has a prominent spot on the Misty Mountain Railroad. Ken used pictures of the old hotel to build this model, and it appears he has truly captured the essence of this magnificent old Southern hotel. Across the railroad from the hotel is the Gainesville Courthouse, which Ken also built. The same 1936 tornado which destroyed the Piedmont Hotel also destroyed this building. Unfortunately, many people had sought refuge in the courthouse as the storm approached, but the F5 tornado leveled downtown Gainesville, and many people lost their lives here. Just down the valley, a few miles from Gainesville, is this building. This is a model of Charles Griffin's home. Ken built this one too, and as usual, it's a very accurate model of the Griffin home. Behind the big house is this garage, and Ken has posed Charles' collection of classic cars outside. Above the garage is where you'll find the Misty Mountain Railroad. Situated on top of one of the nearby mountains is perhaps Ken's finest creation, his scratch-built model of the famous Biltmore Estate. Here again, Ken used photos of the real thing to guide him in the construction of this marvelous building. Shortly after Ken completed the Biltmore, a group of tourists from England visited the Misty Mountain. They noticed that Ken had placed Queen Elizabeth and her husband in the entranceway of the estate in tribute to the Queen's 80th birthday. The tourists took many pictures of this scene, and when they got back to England, they evidently told the Queen about this. Charles later received a letter from the Queen sent from Buckingham Palace, thanking him for portraying this scene in honor of the Queen's 80th birthday. While the buildings and the scenery make the Misty Mountain Railroad a very special model railroad, it's the trains that really make it shine. Things were going well at the Misty Mountain when suddenly disaster struck. On August 25, 2010, Charles' son Ken suffered a massive heart attack and died. He was only 50 years old. Ken's passing left his wife Pia and his two young boys, Cooper and Jonah, in a heartbreaking situation. Charles was devastated, so much so that his friends feared for his health and well-being during that dark time. But we are fortunate that the passage of time slowly but surely heals all wounds. Eventually, Charles was able to accept Ken's passing and move on. Something that helped Charles and his family deal with this tragedy was Ken's presence all over the Misty Mountain Railroad. Ken left a magnificent legacy in the form of his scratch-built buildings. Ken's legacy will live on for many, many years at the Misty Mountain Railroad. For Charles, it's the beacon atop Brasstown Bald that holds special significance.
It's the highest point in Georgia. It's called the top of Georgia. And we wanted to make a model of the real tower, which Ken did. And we got that up there just 2 weeks before he died. So it's really a memorial to him. And it just shows out over the whole thing, over all his work and everything. And we are so grateful to be able to have that. We appreciate the opportunity to show his work and his creativeness.
Every year during the Christmas holiday, the Misty Mountain Railroad opens its doors to the public. Thousands of people come to tour the layout between Thanksgiving and Christmas. In 2012, almost 9,000 people enjoyed the tour of the Misty Mountain. Local charities help with parking and crowd control, and a small admission fee is charged. But every dollar of the proceeds is donated to the charities that help out. Even though thousands of people walk around this layout, there are no "do not touch" signs, no sheets of plexiglass protecting things, nothing at all between the visitor and the railroad. And much of the railroad is well within the reach of little fingers. Yet nothing gets damaged.
One of the teachers told me that the students, the kids are so thrilled with it all, and in all of it, they're in shock, and they wouldn't think of doing anything to it. I don't know. There are a few little mishaps we have, but nothing serious, and we can fix it in 10 or 15 minutes after a tour. There's several groups of children who have health problems and are not doing well, and we get them in there, and it just lights them up, you see it, and that's very rewarding. This was never meant to be a public display, but it is now, and I hope we advance model railroading. I think we do to a lot of people, and inspire them to get busy and have a model railroad, especially for their kids. My two youngest grandsons are really interested in it, so that they carry on the tradition of it. You get in your 80s and you have problems. I have problems, health problems and things. So it takes your mind off of all that, and it really gets you excited. And that's what you need in life, something to get excited and enthused about, and you're going to have fun and go ahead and do it. There's a lot of different things, but this is one of the best. I love model railroading.